Mira shivered in fear every time the eerie crow visited, for by morning her newborn son would always vanish. Tonight, a raven circled above Emberwood Cottage, briefly landing on the roof before perching in the old oak tree outside. Their dog, Max, barked relentlessly, but the raven remained still, its cawing echoing in the cold night. Terror filled Mira as she remembered the pattern. Each time the raven came calling, her newborn disappeared by dawn. She grabbed her lantern, clutching her baby to her chest, and rushed to find her husband Lucas, in his study. But when she opened the door, the room was empty. Panic rising, she hurried to her father-in-law's room. "He's gone," she gasped, but her father-in-law only scolded her and told her to return to her room. Desperate, Mira tried to explain what always happened after the raven's visit, but her father-in-law dismissed her fears, urging her to leave. Tears welled up in her eyes as she returned to the living room, sitting on the couch, trembling with her baby in her arms. Max kept barking, and the raven continued its cawing for hours before it finally fell silent. Mira was in despair, dialing Lucas's number repeatedly, but the calls wouldn't connect. Where could he be, she wondered, her hands shaking as she tried again and again. Exhausted, she eventually fell asleep, praying softly, "Please, let this one be safe." Mira had given birth to 4 sons, but each had vanished on the 7th night. At first, she thought it was some cruel twist of fate. When it happened again, her mother had insisted on visiting the village healer, but Mira refused. After losing her 4th child, her mother stopped coming, no longer able to bear the heartbreak. Mira woke to a loud banging on the door. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice trembling. Silence. She asked again, but still no response. Her father-in-law emerged, annoyed, and told her to open the door. Confused and scared, Mira hesitated, but her father-in-law unlocked the door himself. Lucas walked in, draped in a strange black robe. Mira checked the time. It was 2 a.m. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ignoring her, Lucas walked straight to his room and shut the door. She knocked, pleading with him to let her in, but he didn't answer. Defeated, she returned to her room, holding her baby close, and eventually fell into a troubled sleep. The next morning, her baby was gone. Mira's scream pierced the air, bringing her father-in-law and their neighbor rushing into the room. "It's happened again," she sobbed, pointing to the empty crib. Her father-in-law collapsed in grief. Lucas entered the room, his expression cold, shaking his head before turning away. "This can't keep happening," Mira cried out, her voice filled with determination. She called her mother, telling her everything and finally agreeing to the healer's help. Her mother promised to come the next day. When she arrived, she gave Mira 7 talismans, instructing her to bury them behind the house after 10 days. On the 10th day, Mira followed her mother's instructions, placing the talismans carefully in the ground. That night, Max started barking again, but this time he was frantic, running in circles around the cottage. They tried to calm him, but he wouldn't stop until, finally, he began digging furiously in the yard. Mira watched, heart pounding, as Max unearthed something wrapped in black cloth. Trembling, she approached and unwrapped it, revealing the lifeless body of her baby. She gasped, her knees buckling as cold sweat dripped down her face. Struggling to stay calm, Mira called her mother, her voice shaking as she told her what she had found. Her mother urged her to stay strong and promised to come again. That night, Mira followed the healer's final instructions to the letter. When the raven returned at 2 a.m., she stood firm, holding her baby tightly and chanting the words the healer had taught her. The raven cawed for hours, but eventually it flew away. For the first time, Mira held her baby as the sun rose. She was overjoyed but cautious. Then, out of nowhere, her father-in-law began to wail in his room. Mira stood, puzzled by the sudden outburst, when he burst into her room, crying. "Mira, you—" he started, but before he could finish, he transformed into the raven right before her eyes.